Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby here with the one and only Audra McDonald, who is Tony nominated this year for Ohio State Murders. Congratulations, Audra, on
Thank
this
you.
nomination.
Thank you.
This play, it has existed for quite some time, but only just made its Broadway debut this season. And I'm ashamed to say that despite living and breathing theater, I was not really familiar with playwright Adrienne Kennedy before this. So I'm curious, what drew you to this story and her words?
Well, honestly, I wasn't that familiar with Adrienne's work either, and that is a shame. And again, as steeped in theater as I am, even though I didn't study acting like in a college sort of setting. So, I mean, maybe that's where I would have been introduced to her work, but I just hadn't been. So, um, I was asked to do a reading of Ohio State Murders during the pandemic for Jeffrey Richards. He was just putting a bunch of plays, on Zoom, to keep people engaged. And he asked Kenny Leon to direct it. And anytime Kenny Leon's name comes up, I'm always trying to jump at the opportunity to work with him again. And so I read the play and I thought, oh my, I, you know, it grabbed my heart and just shook it when I read it. And so I said, okay, I want to do this. So we did the read through. We rehearsed about, I don't know, 2 hours before then we actually did the Zoom reading, And when we finished, I couldn't breathe.
Mm.
I was so stunned, and my soul was so shaken by what I had just read, that I couldn't let it go. I really couldn't. And then when I learned the history of Adrienne Kennedy's work and Adrienne herself, and learning that she had never been on Broadway, and at that point I think she was about 88, 89, maybe 89 when we did the reading. And a day later, Jeffrey Richards said, do you want to bring this to Broadway with Kenny and help Adrienne get her Broadway debut? And I didn't. It's like, how I feel when I respond to being asked to do other plays or musicals. I know immediately what my answer is, and I say it without even thinking it. My body, my soul kind of just says it, yes, or no. But the yeses come quickly, and without any thought. So that's how I felt about this.
Yeah, it's, a friend was asking me after I saw it because they were not familiar either. And they said, what is it about? Sum it up. And I had to pause for a moment because it it is the intersection of so many different ideas. There's systemic racism, there is violence against women, there are societal structures that oppress women in academia specifically. Do you find it's difficult to find roles that are this complex on stage?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's difficult to find those roles. It's difficult to get those roles produced. I think that's more of the rarity, especially when it's a play written by a Black woman about a Black woman's experience centering a Black woman. I mean, it's the rarity, and it's a Black middle-aged woman at that. I mean, so the all the sort of like different, the alchemy that came together in Adrienne's mind to write this piece, and then to have all that come together and make it work for us to get it to Broadway was just unheard of. And so I knew that this was a special project, and I knew that this was a role the likes of which I would not see again. So I just had to jump at it. And you're right, the complexities and the way the intersectionality of all the different types of oppression that Suzanne Alexander's character has gone through and probably continues to go through, even though she's looking back on all this, or recognizing that all of this is still living with her. And because the play is autobiographical, it's the same thing for Adrienne. A lot of what happened to her and her experience at Ohio State still resonates and lives within her in a very deep, deep way. And the other thing I found fascinating about doing this play at this particular time is I think when the play was written in the 80s, I think, I don't want to put thoughts or ideas into Adrienne's head, but I know that if I had seen it as an audience member in the 80s, I would have thought, well, we're moving away from those times. We're heading in a direction away from that toward the future, and to now be in 2022 and feel like we have just made a sharp U-turn and gone straight back past the 80s in terms of where the racism, the systemic racism, the rampant racism, the misogyny, all of it. It's just it's rearing its ugly head in such a profound way right now. So in some ways, I think the play has more resonance now. You can look at it as a cautionary tale, or not even a cautionary tale, as something that's happened and is continuing to happen, and certainly seems like there's no sign of any of it abating.
And it's a lot of weight for that character to carry. And it's not a solo piece. There are other actors with you on stage, but so much of it is on your back on this play. How does that journey, like that level of difficulty, compare to a regular piece?
Well, I have to say, I pick things that are hard, because the last thing I did on Broadway was a two-hander, Frankie and Johnny, with Michael Shannon. And in that, two-handers are very difficult. You do have someone on stage with you, but it's just the two of you going at it the whole evening and having to lift the play up. And that's a degree of difficulty that I had never experienced before. And then Lady Day, same sort of thing. There's other people on stage, but basically the show is on your back. So what I was not prepared for, because I had had all this other experience in doing really difficult roles like this, I was not prepared for the psychological toll that this piece took on me, and the fact that I am still recovering from it. And I was not aware that I was carrying the PTSD of having done that play that I was actually carrying. And it took my therapist telling me, and my husband sort of saying, this is still with you a little bit, and part of that's a good thing, and then part of it is like, one has to take good care of oneself when we do what we do. I'm really usually good about leaving my characters at the theater and not bringing them home with me. But this one crept home with me, and maybe it's because where we are in society right now, in this world right now, it in some ways felt inescapable.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, this is maybe a slight spoiler, but the run is over now, so we can dive into a little bit. So the finale of this play, the final moments are something that I think will stay with me forever. When Suzanne speaks aloud, she says goodbye to her daughters.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine, performing that as a mother in real life. How do you call up the emotion for that?
Honestly, it was a mixture of different ways to call up the emotion. And this is going to sound counterintuitive, but the point was to not call up the emotion. The point was to make sure that I spoke their names, that I honored their lives and their presence in my life. And in delivering the indictment of what that school and that systemic racism and society did to her, and then shouting her daughter's names to the heavens, it was more about making sure that I did that I had to honor them in that way. So the more I held on to the necessity of making sure I got through that moment, the harder the moment became. And that's where the emotion would come. So usually, and Kenny was very, very hard on me about this, but I love him. He's that kind of director. I love that. I love a director that pushes you. He's like, it can't be a moment where you break down. You've got to get it out there. You must do it. And so but the journey that she's taken to get to that moment is a painful one. So I tried to not worry about, as Audra, as the actress, I didn't try to worry about what emotion was coming up. It was just making sure that I said their names and I said goodbye to them and I honored them. And I spoke their lives, because their lives were secret, however short-lived they were basically a secret. So it was making sure that she honored them in that way. And that's how the emotion came up.
Yeah, it's startling to see her, because at the end it's like this woman has been hit by a freight train. And it shows up in your physicality and your mannerisms. And I don't think I've ever seen you on stage use like the same physicality or same vocal mannerisms in a character. Are those things that you establish from the outset, or are they kind of things you find along the way with a character?
Well, I certainly want to make sure, and that's something, in my journey as an actress, again, I don't really have any formal training. I just have lots of practical training and lots of wonderful directors that I've worked with and actors that I've worked with over the years that I've learned from. In my journey, I remember when I was working on Raisin in the Sun with Kenny Leon 537 years ago. The first couple of weeks in rehearsal, he was like, I'm seeing Audra McDonald up on stage. I don't want to see Audra McDonald. I need to see Ruth younger. You need to find out how Ruth talks, how Ruth walks. And that may sound like elementary stuff, for, acting basics 101. But that lesson has never left me. So with every character, I try to make sure that I really have a good physical understanding of where they live in their body. Another thing is like Suzanne Alexander is a very, intellectual woman. She's very cerebral. And in order to have survived with the trauma that she has had all these years, she has to leave off of her body and stay up in her head as much as she possibly can. So I think that's why the voice was pitched where it was, which is also a nod to Adrienne Kennedy, whose voice is pitched very high and very cerebral up here. And so in doing that, it gave me something to fight against as the emotion started to try and pull her down. So, which is why by the end, you see she's a little mangled, but then is able to walk out. That's why Kenny said, let's make sure she puts that coat back on and walks out of there, with some sort of strength. So that's a long-winded answer of saying it's very important for me to make sure that I understand the physicality of each character and make sure that it's their physicality and not Audra's.
Yeah. Is all that work harder to do in a setting like this where it's, the set is not like based in realism? Sometimes your jacket becomes, or a scarf becomes the baby. What is that like working in that realm?
It was fascinating, Sam. It really was. And this was all Kenny. Kenny is a brilliant director. And one of the ways he works is with Dreamwork. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn by telling one of his secrets, because most of his actors know it. He listens to his dreams at night and then comes in and says, you know what? I don't know what I was dreaming, but I know that we can't have an actual physical, literal representation of a baby on stage. So in my dreams last night, I was thinking scarves were coming up. So we got to figure out a way. And in doing so, you can put all of the emotion and all of the physicality that you want, and it can change. And then when it needs to not be the center of focus or the center of attention, it can become a scarf again or whatever. But if we had an actual doll up there, which we tried at one point, when it wasn't the doll, you just see it sort of sitting over there just like this. And it would have taken something away, but the audience can then sort of imbue it themselves with all the emotion, the physicality that they want as well too, because it was something sort of I don't know what I'm trying to get at, but so that kind of work was fascinating, and in a way it freed me up. And the same thing with the sort of non-literal set there, it kind of freed me up to slip in and out of memory as she had to do, and slip into different emotions. And also because the play is not linear, she doesn't tell it in a linear way.
Right.
The play could be 2 minutes long if you wanted. She could say, I was asked to talk about violent imagery in my work. The reason there's violent imagery in my work is because I was basically raped, and both of my daughters were murdered by my, professor who became my lover, who was basically rape, and all the systemic racism I experienced while I was here. And she could have done it like that, but she has to tell the story in a certain way. And so the sort of literal set, the non-literal prop pieces, all of that helped to sort of let her wander in and out of the stacks of her mind.
Yeah, it's amazing. And this is your latest Tony nomination for this role. You have 6 Tony Awards over the course of your career, and this nomination brings you up to number 10 nominations, which ties you with Chita Rivera and Julie Harris as the most nominated actor in the history of the Tonys. what feelings when you hear those facts, like what does that bring up for you?
I mean, the first thing you say cheetah and my mind goes blank just because I'm like, cheetah, because I love her so much, and I listened to her growing up and now she's a friend. And so, it's like I go squirrel, cheetah, and Julie Harris, who just, I had the pleasure of meeting during masterclass when I was working with Zoe Caldwell because they were friends. And she is so revered in my mind, and her work was so brilliant. So I immediately go to my awe of the two of them. And then the rest of me goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't, do you know what I mean? I can't comprehend it. And it's an amazing honor, but it's out here. It's almost like I can't touch that. Do you know what I mean? I guess it's a reality, but it's not really a reality for me because I can't touch it. Rehearsal is how I can touch that, or being on stage is how I can touch that, or growing as an actress is how I can touch that. So it's a weird thing for me to comprehend, but I think Julie and Cheetah are amazing.
Well, if we can go connect to some other amazing women that have been in your history, if you'll indulge me a little history for a moment, because
Okay.
I was thinking of this video. You were involved in a Sondheim birthday concert, which many theater nerds call the Red Dress Concert, because it's these group of amazing Broadway women,
Yes.
and it's probably, the most binged Broadway video of all time, maybe. Once you do one, you got to go down all six of them. And I was watching it, recently just because of the passing of Stephen Sondheim. And all these years later, you were standing up there with that amazing group. What's your biggest favorite memory of that night?
Those moments can be sort of fight or flight because they're incredibly intimidating and scary, and like, will I get through it? And here I am at that point, it was still Avery Fisher Hall, or maybe it was David Geffen Hall. I don't think it was. But anyway, and Sondheim's in the audience, and there's everyone up on the stage who I've ever loved and admired and worshipped. And now everybody's looking at me and I'm supposed to sing. I'm sorry, I've got to go. I can't do this. So there's that. But because Lonnie staged it the way he did, Lonnie Price staged it the way he did, that particular moment where he had all of us sitting there watching and applauding each other's numbers as they were happening, I felt much more supported than I thought I would be. Time felt like it stood still. I was able to sit there, and during even rehearsals too, watch my heroes, be brilliant, stumble on lyrics, say, well, Lonnie, what am I supposed to do at this point, or whatever. Watch their process and then bask in the glory of their incredible talents that night. And something about it made the space feel sacred in a way, and also sort of made the space feel like, well, what else are you supposed to do when you get up here? What else are you supposed to do? So you might as well do your best, and so it ended up being a very joyful, life-changing experience. It's a core memory that I'll never forget. But I think if you had told me that I was going to do that, I would have said not in a million years, because I wouldn't have survived it. I would have fainted, because I was very, very famous for fainting during concerts. I thought I wouldn't have gotten through that. But I didn't. And it's a core memory for me now.
Great memory. And guarantee you many folks are still watching that memory on YouTube every day. Audra, thank you so much for chatting with me. Congratulations again on your latest nomination. And for everyone watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby. Stick with us the rest of this season. Thank you, Audra.
All right. You take care.